The Naples arrangement. The Kabbalists expanded this idea of nothing, and got a second kind of nothing which they called Ein Sof without limit. This idea seems not unlike that of space. They then decided that in order to interpret this mere absence of any means of definition, it was necessary to postulate the Ein Sof or limitless light. By this they seem to have meant very much what the late Victorian men of science meant, or thought that they meant, by the luminiferous ether. The space-time continuum. All this is evidently without form and void. These are abstract conditions, not positive ideas. The next step must be the idea of position. One must formulate this thesis: if there is anything except nothing, it must exist within this boundless light, within this space, within this inconceivable nothingness, which cannot exist as nothingness, but has to be conceived of as a nothingness composed of the annihilation of two imaginary opposites. Thus appears the point, which has neither parts nor magnitude, but only position. But position does not mean anything at all unless there is something else, some other position with which it can be compared. One has to describe it. The only way to do this is to have another point, and that means that one must invent the number 2, making possible the line. But this line does not really mean very much, because there is yet no measure of length. The limit of knowledge at this stage is that there are two things, in order to be able to talk about them at all. But one cannot say that they are near each other, or that they are far apart, one can only say that they are distant. In order to discriminate between them at all, there must be a third thing. We must have another point. One must invent the surface, one must invent the triangle. In doing this, incidentally, appears the whole of plane geometry. One can now say, A is nearer to B than A is to C. But, so far, there is no substance in any of these ideas. In fact, there are no ideas at all, except the idea of distance and perhaps the idea of betweenness, and of angular measurement, so that plane geometry, which now exists in theory, is after all completely inchoate and incoherent. There has been no approach at all to the conception of a really existing thing. No more has been done than to make definitions, all in a purely ideal and imaginary world. Now then comes the abyss. One cannot go any further into the ideal. The next step must be the actual, at least, an approach to the actual. There are 3 points, but there is no idea of where any one of them is. A fourth point is essential, and this formulates the idea of matter. The point, the line, the plane. The fourth point, unless it should happen to lie in the plane, gives the solid. If one wants to know the position of any point, one must define it by the use of 3 coordinate axes. It is so many feet from the north wall, and so many feet from the east wall, and so many feet from the floor. Thus there has been developed from nothingness as something which can be said to exist. One has arrived at the idea of matter. But this existence is exceedingly tenuous, for the only property of any given point is its position in relation to certain other points. No change is possible, nothing can happen. One is therefore compelled, in the analysis of known reality, to postulate a fifth positive idea, which is that of motion. This implies the idea of time, for only through motion, and in time, can any event happen. Without this change and sequence, nothing can be the object of sense. It is to be noticed that this number 5 is the number of the letter He in the Hebrew alphabet. This is the letter traditionally consecrated to the Great Mother. It is the womb in which the Great Father, who is represented by the letter Yod, which is pictorially the representation of an ultimate point, moves and begets active existence. There is now possible a concrete idea of the point, and, at last, it is a point which can be self-conscious, because it can have a past, present and future. It is able to define itself in terms of the previous ideas. Here is the number 6, the center of the system, self-conscious, capable of experience. At this stage it is convenient to turn away for a moment from the strictly Kabbalistic symbolism. The doctrine of the next 3 numbers, to some minds at least, is not very clearly expressed. One must look to the Vedanta system for a more lucid interpretation of the numbers 7, 8, and 9, although they correspond very closely with the Kabbalistic ideas. In the Hindu analysis of existence, the rishis, sages, postulate 3 qualities: sat, the essence of being itself; chit, thought, or intellection; and ananda, usually translated bliss, the pleasure experienced by being in the course of events. This ecstasy is evidently the exciting cause of the mobility of existence. It explains the assumption of imperfection on the part of perfection. The absolute would be nothing, would remain in the condition of nothingness. Therefore, in order to be conscious of its possibilities and to enjoy them, it must explore these possibilities. One may here insert a parallel statement of this doctrine from the document called the Book of the Great Auk to enable the student to consider the position from the standpoint of 2 different minds.